Welcome to Monograph, Alabama Public Television's spotlight on art and creativity in Alabama. I'm your host, Jackie Clay. Today we're going to visit Alabama Contemporary Art Center in Mobile and chat with Elizabeth Elliott about the intricacies of being a curator.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good.
Yes. Hey, so this is my friend Elizabeth Elliott. She is the Director of Exhibitions and Programs here at Alabama Contemporary.
Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Let me show you around.
Yes.
So we're a contemporary art space in Mobile, Alabama. We've got 10 to 12 exhibitions a year concurrently, which runs the gambit between solo artist projects and thematic group shows from regional to international.
What type of work do you show in addition to it being contemporary art?
We are really focused on the kind of work that doesn't have a natural venue in Mobile. And so some of the artists we work with have a really strong commercial practice, but are interested in taking a risk, either in subject matter or materials. And so we really want to be a venue for artists to take a divergent path. We also do a lot of site-specific commissioning of new work.
What does that mean, site-specific?
So that's when an artist responds to a physical space, but it can also be, and we're really interested in artists who want to engage with the local history, the local community, and incorporate elements of our community and our city into their work in a responsive way.
What's an example of an upcoming exhibition?
So in December, we're opening a project called Operation Tumbleweed, which is an artist named Kay Olin who put a tumbleweed in a bulletproof case and traveled with it all along the Mexican-American border. And she writes it letters, and the tumbleweed writes her letters, and they communicate in a really interesting and quirky way. We've got that, and then we also have a guest curator program. So in January, we're opening an exhibition called If You Have Ghosts, which will be for contemporary fiber artists from the West Coast. And very contemporary fiber, like there's some digital weaving in the exhibition and new approaches to what fiber and textiles and those kinds of materials can be.
Those are some exciting projects that you're bringing in. You know, what are some of the other parts of your job that you can share with us?
So I'm a curator, and occasionally I get to originate my own exhibitions, but I also really enjoy working with artists and other curators to actualize their projects. I run the schedule, I paint the baseboards, I do a lot.
Yeah, I want to hear about painting those baseboards. You know?
Okay.
Right now we're going to share with you Jean-Jacques Gaudel's many decade spanning career here in the state of Alabama.
I was born in 1946 in France, in a small village, and travel has always been a big part of my life as soon as I could get away from home. Eventually I ended up here totally by chance. As a kid, I kind of dreamed of being either an artist or an architect, but my family didn't have very much money. My dad was just a teacher, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I was supposed to do something practical, I suppose. I was educated as a mechanical engineer, and I picked a job with a company that did oil research, and I knew they would send me somewhere. I worked in Spain, I worked in Germany a little bit, in the Far East, in Indonesia, in the bush in New Guinea, and so forth, and then one day got tired of working, basically, and had saved some money, so we decided with a friend to buy a camper and equip it and ship it to New York and drive to Brazil, which we did in 1972. Happened to drive through Birmingham. This guy said, I need no French girl here, so we stayed another day, and he took us to meet the French girl, and she was my wife's best friend. She's the reason I came back here. She's the reason I stayed here. She's pretty much been the beacon in my life. 45 years later, I'm still here, and I've done all kinds of things over those years. I suppose some wife would have say, you know, well, go out and get a real job or whatever, you know, but she kind of let me pretty much play and do, you know, and do my thing. So when I came here, I wasn't an artist, and I ended up being an artist and went through a lot of different stages, you know, before I actually became an artist here. When I moved here, basically, my wife had just bought an old house in Forest Park. I spent probably 3 years basically scraping the paint and redoing the house and painting and all that stuff. And in the process, since we didn't have very much money and we couldn't find furniture we liked, I ended up making most of my furniture for the house. And that kind of got me into the decorating business. And that lasted for a while, but I suppose I have that bug to try different things, you know. I just kind of decided I wanted to be an artist. Starting about in '81, painting flowers, and then going to painting little groups of objects, small buttons, tiny little things, just almost abstract paintings, basically, but being photorealistic at the same time. And then I moved on to some still lifes. Most of my work has always been over scale. It's like I was painting the buttons, which were this big, I was painting them that big, you know. I think I did 4 or 5 of these large paintings, and that's the only one that's left. There's one that went to Germany and another one to New York, and I'm not sure where the other one was. I've lost track, but they were so big that I actually built a hinge system so they can be folded in half for shipping. Corporations bought a lot of paintings, so I have pieces at Alabama Power, Coca-Cola, bottling company, various Parisians, you know, all kind of places. The idea is to find something that's interesting, and usually, especially traveling, you realize everyday objects are beautiful. You've got colors and stripes and patterns and all those peeling paint textures. I mean, you can still find that in the background of my work, you know, to this day. We had been traveling to Guatemala and bringing all those wooden jointed figures. And then I did that triptych piece, which was kind of my, I suppose, masterpiece in a way. I put everything in there. It was done in the traditional European triptych style, meaning that it closes completely. So the outside is very neutral. All of a sudden, all that color jumps at you. And I use a technique that's similar to what watercolor does, except it's oil, basically. And I use very transparent paints, which allows the colors to glow, just like, you know, being reflected from the white of the canvas. When I finished it, the question is, you know, what do I do now, you know, to do better? I mean, I probably spent more than 6 months on this piece. Anyway, it took forever to paint, and I think I just OD'd on there and had to do something else. I went to the library. At the time there was no internet yet, and did some research on sculpture generally, just trying to. I've always worked that way. Since I didn't go to art school, I had to educate myself. The inspiration going back to those Guatemalan jointed figure, I decided I was going to do some of those, but my own way with different material, not just using wood. So I started, you know, like upholstering part of them. I had done upholstery, of course, when I was building furniture. And then at the time, I had thought of building a house with inspiration from You know, Italy, Spain, France, Mexico, Guatemala, pretty much everywhere we had been in the Mediterranean world, but with the idea of the courtyard, obviously from Mexico. So I've built this house with my own hands, pretty much. When the house was finished, we moved in, and I decided I was going to build an airplane. Of course, I didn't want to build a regular plane like they do now, plastic. I don't like plastic, so it had to be an old-fashioned wood and fabric plane. After building the plane, which was done in about 2008, I think, I wanted to get back to doing art, but I didn't want to do the same thing again. In some ways, I don't know if I had to define my taste because it changes. I just like the unusual, I suppose, and I don't mind being different. That's something, you know, most people like to conform, and I guess I'm basically an anti-conformist at heart. I have bipolar disorder, which means I have that, you know, cycles of up and down. I'm also sensitive to the light and the length of the days, you know, like seasonal, whatever they call it, seasonal. So I know, you know, I get high in the spring and then start going down in the fall, and usually Christmas is the low point. Many projects have ended up abandoned around Christmas time because in order to get started back up, I had to figure out a new exciting project. So the old project got dropped. So I had a project about making clocks, which was very exciting. I enjoyed it very much. I mean, I have to say, even the unfinished project, I don't regret them in any way. I mean, you know, it's like it was all excited because I learned something. Once I really know how to do something, but then I lose interest. I get bored. I'm a student, basically. You know. I like to learn new things. The learning process is really probably the most exciting part of it.
Hi.
Hi.
So earlier you were sharing how you work with artists. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So we work with artists on solo projects and installations, but we also do a lot of professional development with artists. One of the ways that I think about Alabama Contemporary and how we create opportunities for our creative community is rungs on a ladder. If an artist is coming up in the area, it's one thing to have opportunities for them, but you also need a way for them to meet those opportunities. And professional development is a tool set for them to be able to identify what a good opportunity is, because not all opportunities are created equal in the art world, but also a way for them to sort of understand, navigate, and communicate about their practice in a way that institutions and organizations can help facilitate what they want and what their goals are.
Yeah, so it's not just about fostering their career at or with the Alabama Contemporary, but it's also about extending their experiences with arts institutions in general.
Yeah, extending the reach of their work. If we can be a little bit more hands-on when we take on a new artist for their first solo exhibition, they'll also come out on the other end of that better equipped to take their work more places.
How does that work materially? Like what do you do with artists?
I do open talks and try to educate and communicate locally about what a curator does. The general assumption is that curators pick and choose things on the basis of what they like, and like has very little to do with it. We serve a broad community, and in curating, you know, you're thinking about what you're communicating to your audience and what it has to do with your audience, what it means to them. And when we can sort of break that down into, we're looking at the feasibility of a project, we're looking at its critical goals, what it has to say about the world it lives in, but also what it means or might mean to the people in this community. That's a lot different than whether it's pretty or not. So if an artist knows what I'm looking for and what I need to see in an artist statement and proposal, they're going to be better equipped to write one. We also do proposal writing workshops, artist statement writing workshops, where they're able to get models of artist statements and project proposals that we've accepted, and they get a better understanding of why we accepted them, what things we're actually looking for. Honestly, a lot of that kind of subject matter can be dry and intimidating for people, so we really try to do it in a way that where we don't take ourselves as seriously. I have a little thing that I like to do to counter how stuffy it can feel.
I'm excited to see.
Okay.
Up next is a piece on writer Margaret Wrinkle. We'll get to learn more about her capacity to process grief through her practice.
It was definitely not in my mind that I was writing a book. Sorting things out in language, whether you think of yourself as a writer or not, is one way to feel like you have a better grip on your world, especially when it feels like your world is completely out of control. I started out as a poet, and then I wrote for national magazines. Then I took an editing job right when my mother moved into the house across the street from me because she couldn't live safely alone anymore. Shortly after my mother died, very suddenly, my mother-in-law entered hospice care. And so I felt completely subsumed by grief and mortality. And so it was like the grounding of my life had shifted. And a friend of mine said to me, "Would you ever want to write about that?" And it reminded me that writing was the way I made sense of the world. And for 5 years, I had just given it up. And so I started giving myself 15 minutes a day, first thing in the morning, to just write a little bit about my grieving and my love for my mother and also for my mother-in-law. And gradually those little pieces piled up. And at the same time, I was spending a lot of time looking out the window. The natural world was a real source of solace for me because I spent so much of my childhood outdoors. So eventually I started writing about the birds and the butterflies and the snakes in my yard, my little bitty half-acre lot in suburban Nashville. And those two little piles of essays, very short, the kind of thing you can write in 15-minute periods of time, I realized they were talking to each other. And then I started thinking about it as a book without really any clear understanding of how that might work. Milkweed Editions, this wonderful nonprofit press, had an open reading period for creative nonfiction. And I submitted a sample just to try. The editor there, Joey McGarvey, who's just a brilliant editor, she and I had several conversations over the phone, and it was her idea to put the family essays in a sequence, in a narrative arc, chronological, and then take the nature essays and intersperse them as they picked up a theme or picked up an image or picked up a recurrent motif of some kind. And that was the organizational principle that helped me figure out how to structure the book. The nature essays and the family essays didn't need to be separate things if I was remembering a life spent largely in nature. I spent my early childhood in Lower Alabama, spent my school years in Homewood outside Birmingham, and then I went to college in Auburn. And And all the time that I was living in those places, I was spending vast swatches of time at my grandparents' farm in the deep rural country. One church, one little store, and that was it. This landscape is so thoroughly imprinted on me that I still, after 32 years, think of myself as a visiting Tennessean. A blue jay calls, and to me, I'm right back in lower Alabama. Blue jays have a sound that sounds almost exactly like a squeaky screen door, like when the hinge is squeaking. And I hear that and I'm home. The earliest memory I have is of our little house in Andalusia. It must have been a vacant lot between our house and the closest house because it didn't have any trees in it, but there was also no house there. And I have this very, very clear memory of walking through grass that was as tall as my head and holding onto the stroller that my brother was sitting in as our mother pushed us up the hill through that vacant lot to the next door neighbor's house. So the blue jays see a hawk. That's what that sound is. But anyway, so that, it's not what you think of as nature, it's what you think of as, I guess, almost like the Brady Bunch. But there were rattlesnakes in that grass, there were grasshoppers, there were butterflies. So I think that was as much a part of my understanding of nature as my grandparents' farm. My brother, Billy Wrinkle, who is a collage artist, is only a year younger than I am. And his artwork is very aesthetically similar to my aesthetic as a writer. He's very interested in birds and flowers, and this was the story of our family. It was the story of grief over our parents. As we went through the editing process, Billy was gonna do the cover illustration. Then they said, what if Billy made some work specifically for this book? He had this great idea, I think really brilliant idea, that he would not attempt to illustrate the family essays because that almost limits how someone would read it. People reading it, we hope, will see their own family, their own grandmother, their own rural background if they have it. So he focused on the nature essays, but he ordered 40 or 50 little picture frames from antique photo albums. He worked the collages around those frames, and that visually, I think, helps tie the two threads of the essays together in a way that I hadn't even anticipated. Paying attention, a little closer attention to the natural world of my backyard. It's not like this. It's not a wilderness. There's nothing about it that would probably strike you as a wildlife sanctuary, although I've worked very hard to make it wildlife friendly. But the more attention I paid, the more I realized that we aren't separate from the natural world in the way that we like to imagine. When I was growing up in lower Alabama, we did not have air conditioning. I did not know anyone who had air conditioning. The windows were open probably 10 months out of the year. And so the natural world and the human world were very intertwined, or at least the membrane between the two was much more permeable than we think of today. Because if it was gonna rain, you smelled it. If the wind was blowing, you felt it. If the birds were singing, you heard it. Everything was much more in concert. But we have sealed off our homes, and even some people just drive straight into their garages. They never even step out into their yards. If you can't understand that you are a natural creature, then you won't understand that what happens to the natural world is what's going to happen also to you. It doesn't change anything, the fact that we have imagined ourselves to be sequestered from this world. We are part of it. And one of the key things we share is mortality. So in a way, the natural cycles of life and death made me feel less singled out for suffering, and that this grief was just part of a much bigger cycle of life and death that makes sense. It's painful, but it makes sense. So I think of the book as a love letter to my family, but also a love letter to the natural world and the way human cycles of life and death intersect with natural cycles of life and death.
Ta-da! So anytime I have to give a lecture or PowerPoint presentation, I prefer to wear a costume. I find that it helps me not take myself so seriously and helps the audience not feel like they're in a stuffy lecture.
So where do you keep all these?
Well, I keep the rabbit suit in my desk. Specifically, it's a work rabbit suit. And everything else gets stored in bins at home.
Where are we?
We are in the K-12 classroom on our 3rd floor, which is our education space right outside of the open air studio, which we use for adult education classrooms and workshop areas. This is where the magic happens.
I can feel it. Well, thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for sharing Alabama Contemporary with us. And thank you for joining us in our first season in 2019, and we'll see you in 2020. Don't forget, there's more Monograph content online. Stream on demand with the PBS app or visit us at monograph.tv. To stay up to date with all of our videos, be sure to follow and subscribe.